Now let's turn our attention to Saudi Arabia. Reports have come out about the kingdom's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammad bin Salman. Reports about MBS and his anger towards the US. You'll remember that last year, US President Joe Biden had gone to Saudi Arabia. He engaged in fist bump diplomacy, tried his best to bring a thaw in the frosty ties with the kingdom. It's because Biden wanted something. He wanted Riyadh to maintain a steady oil output. That did not happen, and Biden vowed there would be consequences to Saudi Arabia's decision. It turns out that statement was not taken well. Reports say MBS threatened to completely change the US-Saudi relationship. He allegedly said he would impose significant economic costs on the US if it retaliated against the oil cuts. The Crown Prince's fury was revealed in leaked US documents. American officials have said they are not aware of the threat. They also added it could have just been a moment of anger, that it did not reflect the big picture. That explanation seems fair. But what the US has done since then seems to suggest that it was aware of the Saudi prince's rage and it took MBS's threat seriously. Let's look at what has happened since Biden vowed to punish Saudi Arabia for slashing oil output. Saudi has said it will cut output again. There have been no consequences imposed by the US. In fact, it seems Washington is doing its best to mend ties. Even though Biden has not visited the kingdom, a lot of his officials have. High-profile ones like National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and CIA Director William J. Burns. The latest top official to visit is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Blinken met MBS Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan and a host of leaders from the Gulf nations. They spoke of increased cooperation and improving ties. That doesn't sound like the consequences Biden had promised. Instead, Washington seems to be bringing out the checkbook. Blinken thanked Saudi Arabia for its leadership in dealing with the terror group ISIS. Then he pledged money to a regional stabilization fund.
The United States very much appreciates the leadership of Saudi Arabia, not only in hosting this meeting, but for its contributions, constant contributions, and crucial contributions day in, day out to our mission.
Today, we're announcing a funding goal for the Stabilization Pledge Drive of just over $601 million. And I'm announcing that the United States is committing $148.7 million to that fund. This support will meet critical needs that Syrians and Iraqis themselves have identified. Addressing vulnerabilities previously exploited by ISIS.
But it looks like Riyadh wants more than that. Saudi Arabia wants the US to help it set up its domestic nuclear program. Washington has been wary about this. It thinks this risks nuclear proliferation in West Asia. But Riyadh is adamant.
On the issue of nuclear cooperation, it's no secret that we are developing our domestic civilian nuclear program. We would very much prefer to be able to have the US as one of the bidders for that program. There are others that are bidding, and obviously we would like to build our program with the best technology in the world. And that will require a certain agreement to be in place. We have differences of opinion. So we're working on finding a mechanism for us to be able to work together on civilian nuclear technology.
The Saudi foreign minister warned that there are others bidding too, and that may have been a reference to China. Beijing has stepped up its activities in West Asia. It recently brokered a diplomatic deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. President Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia for a grand Arab nation summit. It is possible that China is looking to move into America's traditional backyard, and that may be why Washington is rushing to mend ties with Saudi Arabia. We began by telling you how one leaked US document mentioned MBS's anger. A second leaked document spoke of his plans. Riyadh allegedly planned to buy drones, missiles, and mass surveillance systems from Beijing. That would have meant a shift from the decades of security relations with the US, cutting the strongest bond between the two nations, the military ties. Could that have been the tipping point? And could it have made the US realize everything it could lose by angering MBS? It would explain the U-turn in US diplomacy and why, despite Biden's threat of making MBS a pariah, the US seems to be currying favour with the Crown Prince once again. Let's talk about Ukraine's allies, the NATO. As we mentioned yesterday, NATO is in a bind. Yesterday, we told you how NATO was divided over Ukraine's membership. Of course, it isn't the only country to cause rifts in the alliance. There's also Sweden. Stockholm seems desperate to join the security group. The Swedish Prime Minister reportedly made an announcement today. He said Sweden will allow NATO to base troops on its territory even before it formally joins. This seems like a last-ditch attempt to get over the line and join the security alliance. Sweden wants to officially be welcomed during the next NATO summit. That will take place in Lithuania's capital, Vilnius, on July 11. Sweden announced that it wanted to join NATO last year, but its membership has been stalled by Turkey and Hungary. Most of the resistance is from Turkey. Ankara has accused Stockholm of harboring what it calls terrorists. These are Kurdish people who are part of the Kurdistan Workers' Party or PKK. Ankara calls it a terror group and says Sweden is allowing it to thrive. So far, Turkey has vetoed the Nordic nations' membership. Well, it seems Sweden is making desperate moves to secure entry into NATO. And on Wednesday, it agreed to extradite a member of the Kurdistan Workers' Party to Turkey. This is part of the demands made by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Stockholm also enacted a new anti-terror law that targets the PKK. All of this is to appease Erdogan and get his nod to joining NATO. Sweden recently made this appeal to Turkey and Hungary. Listen it.
Everything that we undertook to deliver during the Madrid summit is fulfilled, and it is time for Turkey and Hungary to start the ratification of the Swedish membership to NATO. That is the clear message that I will send, and I have already received before this meeting, clear signs of the commitment and the support that we feel from several of the NATO member states. And I believe that this will be reinforced during today's meeting as well.
The appeal was echoed by NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He was in Turkey a few days ago. He was there to convince Erdogan not to veto Sweden's membership.
Sweden has taken significant concrete steps to meet Turkey's concerns. This includes amending the Swedish constitution, ending its arms embargo, and stepping up counterterrorism cooperation, including against the PKK. Important new terrorism legislation has come into force just a few days ago. So Sweden has fulfilled its obligations.
So will this work? Will Erdogan drop his objections in time for the next NATO summit? Or will the problem of Sweden's membership be passed on to the next NATO chief? Because you see, Stoltenberg is up for retirement soon. He will step down as the NATO Secretary General on September 30. If he doesn't resolve the issue soon, Sweden will become his successor's headache. Who will that successor be? There hasn't been any announcement, but there are a number of possibilities. Reports say some NATO members want the next chief to be from Eastern Europe. It's the region closest to Ukraine and most at risk from Russian aggression. The Lithuanian and Estonian prime ministers are reportedly being considered. They also happen to be women, which would give NATO its first female chief. That adds to their chances. Another candidate in the running is Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. She's reportedly keen on the job and recently met US President Joe Biden in Washington. Another frontrunner is British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. He's a former soldier and respected across the alliance. Rishi Sunak was in the US to meet Biden. He's expected to have talked up Wallace for the role. Reporters even asked Biden about the possibility. Here's what he said.
Is it time for a British NATO Secretary General?
Maybe. That remains to be seen. We're going to have to get a consensus within NATO to see that happen. They have a candidate who's a very qualified individual, but we're going to have we have a lot of discussion, not between us, but in NATO, to determine what the outcome of that will be.
So Biden says NATO needs to come to a consensus. But his backing is considered crucial, and he has not backed anyone publicly yet. Whatever happens, the next few months are crucial for NATO. The war in Russia and Ukraine's possible membership are tricky issues. And if Sweden has not joined by then, the next NATO chief will likely have their hands full. Yesterday was World Ocean Day, and people celebrated it across the world. But nobody caught our attention as much as Brazil did. What did Brazilians do to celebrate the day? Well, they hugged the ocean. You'd think that's impossible. But where there's a will, there's always a way. And when people come together, just about anything is possible, even hugging something as humongous as the ocean. Tonight, we'll talk about the oceans, why they're so important, and why Brazilians shouldn't be the only ones hugging them. Because the oceans are becoming the world's trash can. And the time is to act now.
Want to hug the ocean? Here's how you do it. Stand in one line. Hold hands with the two people standing next to you, and watch a larger phenomenon unfold. As hundreds, even thousands of people join hands together on the shores of the sea, all to hug the ocean. This is how Brazil's Rio Beach looked on Thursday. Brazilians held their hands for a symbolic hug. Volunteers also participated in cleaning drives. You'd think, what's the need for such an event? It's for raising awareness about the need to protect waters and marine life.
I think that we are in a game change for the planet, We need to think better, about our habits, our consumption, We need to think better about ourselves, to take care of the animals, to take care of the nature, We're not alone here. We're not an individual, We are together. We are one, This is the message for the new generation.
So the hug wasn't just an extracurricular activity. For the hundreds of Brazilians that took part, it was part of a campaign to save the oceans. Because the oceans are hurting, and they're an extremely important part of the Earth. Oceans account for 70% of the Earth's surface, and they play a crucial role in the health of the natural ecosystem. Not just for marine life, but for life on Earth as a whole. And yet, billions of pounds of trash and pollutants are dumped into the oceans every year. This despite the fact that oceans are majorly responsible for regulating the Earth's climate. Here's an interesting fact. You thought most of the world's oxygen was produced by trees and dense forests? Wrong. By the Amazon forest, perhaps? Again, wrong. About 50% of the Earth's oxygen comes from the oceans. This year, the main purpose of World Ocean Day was to build ocean literacy and raise awareness about the importance of the oceans. 97% of the planet's surface water is found in the oceans. 97% of the planet's surface water is getting contaminated, so we can't afford to be indifferent to marine pollution. Why? Because, for starters, it's harmful to marine species or aquatic life. Next, excess pollution causes depletion of oxygen within oceans, endangering many aquatic species. To top it all, pollution also leads to an excess of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in the oceans. These nutrients promote the growth of algae. They suck up most of the oxygen and prevent sunlight from penetrating the oceans, creating dead zones. As the name suggests, no aquatic life can be found in these zones. So just how polluted are our oceans? Well, there's no exact figure available, but a recent study estimates that the world's oceans are polluted with 171 trillion plastic particles, and the number is only increasing, which is why environmentalists are sounding the alarm. And people are comforting oceans by hugging them, because they are drowning in pollution.
And with that, I bring you Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. If the pictures from New York were not apocalyptic enough, smoke from Canadian wildfires have now blanketed the US capital. Washington, D.C. is now choking on smog. Meanwhile, Ukrainians are using boats to cross the streets after the Kakhovka Dam blast caused floods in parts of South Ukraine. And how many ducks are good for luck? Hong Kong says 2. Giant inflatable double ducks set sail in Hong Kong as an artist believes they will bring good luck to the city. And finally, what makes June 9th significant? On this day in 1934, Donald Duck made his first movie appearance. The character featured in Walt Disney's The Wise Little Hen. Donald Duck is Disney's most popular character. With his trademark shirt and bow tie, he even became the most published comic book character in the world, besides superheroes. That's all I have for you today on Vantage, but do catch Flashback tomorrow at 8 p.m. IST. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend. Palki Sharma will be back with Vantage on Monday.
If you follow international news, you must have heard of sanctions. The US sanctions Russia, the UK sanctions China. Have you wondered what it's all about? More importantly, have you wondered why they never work? Well, sanctions have a very old and complicated history. Also, there's a reason why they never seem to work. World leaders know it, but they won't tell you. Tune into Flashback and find out. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.